Something that you worked for, that you built carefully over years, that you believed was solid, has been taken, or is being taken, or you were living with the specific, persistent dread that it could be taken, that the structure you have organized your life around is more vulnerable than the effort you put into building it suggested it would be. The loss may be professional, the career, the reputation, the standing you earned. It may be financial. It may be the relationship that was supposed to last. It may be the health that you expected to carry you further than it has. Whatever its form, the experience is the same. Something you counted on has proven not to be yours in the way you counted on it. And in the aftermath, the question is not only how to recover, it is whether the framework you built your life around, the framework that made this thing worth having, was ever adequate to the reality it was supposed to describe. Boethius asked this question from a prison cell in 524 AD while waiting to be executed for a crime he almost certainly did not commit. He had been the most powerful statesman in the Western world. He had lost everything in the space of months. And what he wrote in that cell, the Consolation of Philosophy, became the most widely read book in the Western world for the next 1,000 years, not because it solved the problem, because it finally told the truth about it. There is a specific bitterness that arrives when what you counted on as good turns out to be conditional. Not the grief of loss itself, that is real and legitimate and takes the time it takes, the philosophical bitterness, the recognition that the framework you were operating in, the one that said, if you work hard enough, if you build carefully enough, if you live with sufficient virtue and intelligence, then the good things you produce will hold, was not the framework reality was actually operating in. The reputation you built over 20 years disappears in weeks. The relationship you invested everything in ends through factors only partly within your control. The health you maintained carefully declines through mechanisms indifferent to the care. The work you did with genuine excellence goes unrecognized or is taken by someone who did not do the work. Not because you did anything wrong, because the goods of the world, fortune's goods, Boethius would say, are not actually yours in the way you needed them to be. This recognition produces two responses. The first is cynicism. Nothing is secure, effort is pointless, the game is rigged. The second is what Boethius calls the consolation, the recognition that fortune's goods were never the real goods, that what was taken was genuinely valuable, but was not the thing upon which genuine flourishing depends, and that the philosophical work of the aftermath is not the recovery of what was lost, but the clear-eyed examination of what was never yours to lose. He wrote this from prison, awaiting death. It is, by any measure, the most credible context from which the argument has ever been made. Anicius Manlius Severinus Boethius was born around 477 AD in Rome into one of the most distinguished noble families in the late Roman world. He was orphaned young and raised by Symmachus, a senator, scholar, and man of immense influence, whose daughter Rusticiana he would eventually marry. He received the finest education available in the 5th century: Greek philosophy, Latin rhetoric, mathematics, music. He became, in the judgment of his contemporaries and subsequent scholars, the most learned man in the Western world.
His ambition was not political. He wanted to translate the complete works of Plato and Aristotle into Latin, to make the full inheritance of Greek philosophy available to the Latin-speaking world before it was lost. He managed to translate Aristotle's logical works, the Organon, and several other texts. He did not finish. He ran out of time in a way he had not anticipated. He entered public life under the Ostrogothic king Theodoric, who ruled Italy as a largely benevolent administrator. Boethius rose rapidly. He was appointed consul, the highest symbolic office of the old Roman Republic, and then master of offices, effectively the chief minister of the kingdom. His two sons were appointed consuls simultaneously in 522 AD, an honor without recent parallel. He appeared to be at the apex of everything the world could offer a man of his abilities and character. In 523, he was accused of treason, of corresponding with the Eastern Emperor Justin in Constantinople in a conspiracy against Theodoric. The charge was almost certainly false, probably fabricated by political enemies at court who recognized that Boethius's integrity and influence made him a threat to their own positions. He was arrested, stripped of his property, and imprisoned at Pavia. He was executed in 524, probably by clubbing, at approximately 45 years old. Between his imprisonment and his execution, he wrote the Consolation of Philosophy. The text is a dialogue between Boethius, the prisoner, despairing, angry at the injustice, consumed by the question of why a good man who served justice all his life should come to this end, and Philosophy, who appears to him as a woman and proceeds to answer every complaint with a rigor and a compassion that neither softens the reality nor collapses under it. The philosophy, the argument that makes the consolation not merely consoling, but philosophically serious. Philosophy's first move is to ask Boethius what he lost, not rhetorically, genuinely. What specifically was taken from him? His wealth, his position, his freedom, his reputation. Philosophy agrees that these were real goods, genuinely valuable, genuinely worth having. And then she asks, were they ever yours? Not yours in the sense of earned or deserved, yours in the sense of belonging to you in the way that your reason, your virtue, your capacity for philosophical understanding belongs to you. Things that cannot be taken because they are constitutive of what you are, not circumstances in which you happen to find yourself. She introduces fortune. The wheel of fortune is Boethius's most famous image, the wheel that turns continuously, lifting some to the top and casting others down, indifferent to the merit of those it moves. Fortune is not malicious. She is not even unjust in her own terms. She is simply what she is, the principle of change, the reality that the goods of the external world, wealth, power, reputation, beauty, health, are by their nature impermanent, conditional, lent rather than given, subject to the turn of the wheel regardless of what you did to deserve them. Fortune speaks in the Consolation and says with a directness that stops most readers, "This is my art, this the game I never cease to play. I turn the wheel that spins. I delight to see the high come down and the low ascend. Mount up if you like, but on condition that you do not think it a hardship to come down when the game requires it."
The argument is not that the loss does not matter. It matters. The bitterness is legitimate. What the Consolation is arguing is that the framework that made the loss unbearable, the framework in which fortune's goods are the real goods, in which your flourishing genuinely depends on the wheel remaining in your favor, was always a category error. The real goods, philosophy argues, are the goods of the self, virtue, reason, the examined life, the cultivation of wisdom. These are not subject to fortune's wheel because they are not fortune's goods. They cannot be taken because they are not separate from the person who has them in the way that external goods are separate. This is Boethius's Stoicism, his inheritance from Aristotle and Cicero, and the tradition of philosophical consolation, applied under the most extreme conditions available. And the argument survives the conditions, not because Boethius was at peace with his execution, there is no evidence he was, but because the distinction he was making was real, and the cell was proof of it. Everything fortune had given had been taken. What remained was what philosophy called the true goods, the capacity to think, to write, to face the question honestly, to make the argument as clearly as it could be made. He made it. It survived him by 1,000 years. Now the bridge, because Boethius was a 6th century Roman statesman writing from a death sentence about the theology of providence and the philosophy of fortune, and most people watching this video are not. But here is what has not changed. The job that disappeared and took with it the identity organized around the job, the relationship that ended and took with it the sense of self that the relationship had been sustaining, the reputation attacked and the discovery that the reputation was more fragile than the years invested in it suggested, the health declined and the recognition that the physical capacity counted on as a given was in fact a loan. These are all turns of the wheel, not punishments, not evidence of inadequacy, the wheel turning, as it turns, as it has always turned, as it will turn for everyone who built on fortune's goods and must now reckon with what that building was built on. Boethius is not telling you to stop building on fortune's goods. He is telling you to know what they are, to hold them as fortune holds them, as gifts of the wheel, genuinely valuable, worth pursuing and tending, and not the foundation. The foundation is different. It is what you have when fortune has taken everything else. And the person who has cultivated that foundation through the examined life, the genuine virtue, the capacity for philosophical understanding that neither wealth nor power nor reputation can produce or preserve, has something that the wheel cannot reach. Not comfort in the shallow sense, the specific, philosophically serious, Boethius-tested recognition that what you most fundamentally are is not fortune's property, and that the worst fortune can do, which is to take everything, still leaves the thing that matters. Here is what Boethius asks of you, practically, today.
First, take the honest inventory of what you are building on, not what you have, what you are counting on, the things whose loss would, in your current framework, constitute a fundamental threat to your sense of who you are and whether your life is good. The reputation, the position, the financial security, the relationship, the health. These are fortune's goods, genuinely valuable, worth having and worth working for, and not the foundation. The question Boethius is asking is not, do you have these things? It is, what happens to your sense of yourself and your life if they are taken? If the answer is everything collapses, the framework cannot hold, then the foundation needs examination. Second, identify what fortune cannot take. Not abstractly, specifically. What do you have in the way of understanding, virtue, capacity, genuine character that exists independent of the external circumstances? The quality of attention you bring to the people in your life, the honesty that does not depend on being in a position where honesty is easy, the philosophical understanding you have built that produces in you a quality of equanimity that is available even when the external circumstances do not support it. These are the real goods in Boethius's framework. Not because they are more pleasant than fortune's goods, they are often less pleasant, because they are genuinely yours. They are constitutive of what you are, not conditions in which you find yourself. The wheel cannot reach them. Third, practice holding fortune's goods lightly. Not letting go of them. Boethius is not prescribing asceticism. Holding them with the specific quality of awareness that knows them for what they are. The position, held as a genuine good that is not the foundation. The reputation, valued and tended and not counted on as the ground of self-worth. The relationship, deeply committed to and not demanded to be permanent in a way that fortune cannot guarantee. The person who holds fortune's goods lightly does not love them less. They love them more accurately, which means they love what is actually there rather than what they need to be there. And they suffer less when the wheel turns, not because they are indifferent, but because the suffering was always, in part, the suffering of someone who confused fortune's goods with their own. Fourth, find the consolation in the current difficulty. Whatever has been taken or is being threatened, ask the Boethian question. Not why did this happen, but what remains, what is still here, still yours, still constitutive of what you are that fortune's wheel could not reach, not as compensation for the loss, as the honest accounting of what was never, in fact, at stake.
This is not the denial of the loss, it is the completion of the inventory. Everything fortune gave is accounted for on one side. What is on the other side is what philosophy came to Boethius' cell to show him. What he found when he looked is what he wrote down, and what he wrote down has been read by people in cells and in grief, and in the specific, particular devastation of the person who built on fortune's goods and watched the wheel turn for 1,500 years. I want to close with the image that stays with me when I think about Boethius, not the wheel, not the dialogue or the 5 books of the Consolation, or the extraordinary elegance of the philosophical argument made from a prison cell in Pavia. The 2 sons, made consuls simultaneously, the apex, the thing the world could do to honor a man who had served it faithfully and brilliantly and with genuine virtue. 2 sons in the ancient seats of Roman authority on the same day in the most distinguished city in the world. And the months that followed, the accusation, the arrest, the cell, the execution. Between the apex and the execution, the consolation, not in spite of the fall, from it, because the fall gave him the one thing that the apex could not have given him, the absolute certainty that what he was arguing was true, that the goods of fortune are fortune's goods, that the foundation is elsewhere, that the wheel turns for everyone, including the man whose sons were consuls on the same day in the most distinguished city in the world. He wrote it all down, and what he wrote, from the cell that fortune gave him, has outlasted everything that fortune took. Here is the question Boethius leaves us with today. Think of what you have built, carefully, over years, with genuine effort and genuine virtue, and ask honestly how much of your sense of yourself and whether your life is good depends on that building remaining intact. That dependency is the measure of how much of your foundation is fortune's, not the having of these things, the depending, the part of you that knows, in the quiet, that the wheel could turn, and what would remain if it did. Leave that in the comments, because naming what you think would remain, honestly, without the performance of philosophical equanimity you have not yet earned, is the beginning of the Boethian practice, not accepting the fall, knowing what the fall cannot reach. I'll see you in the next one.